Hey everyone, welcome back. As usual, I'm your host Jim with the G, and this is the Dirty Wrench podcast. Glad to have you guys back this week. Got a lot of good stuff, a lot of good stuff to talk about when it comes to the podcast. We were at I think a little under five, or right at 5,500. Sorry, listeners. We've overshot that, and we're at 650. That's pretty good. So we're almost at 700 in these last 2 months. So that's pretty good bump. Um, Also, looking at everything right now, as I'm looking at it on the computer, uh, our Canada, Australia, and Russia listeners have listened more or have just listened enough to be tagged. So that's pretty neat. Appreciate you guys. Um, Thank you guys going. But yeah, so other than that, that's all I really got to say, when it comes to moving stuff. But yeah, we got a good episode this week. Trying a lot of new things, trying to maybe talk a little more controversial topics today. But yeah, as if you don't know already, my last podcast was a vlog on YouTube, and supposedly it's supposed to be a vlog on Spotify. Still working that out, so we'll figure that out when we figure that out, I guess. But yeah, gonna start trying to do more video content. Maybe do some, real stuff so you guys can see like real world stuff. Might do some tutorial videos or some kind of, like little like instructional videos or something like that. Maybe, we'll see how it goes. But anyway, not to drag this on, but yeah, so we're gonna we're gonna spread our wings a little bit with this next topic. Like I said, I appreciate you guys. Remember, if you guys like the content, tell a friend. Maybe they might like it too. And of course, after every episode, comment underneath. I had a poll last episode. No one really did it. Why don't you guys go vote? I know it doesn't mean anything, but at least it shows you interacting. And as usual, if you want to hear something or you didn't like what I said or maybe you want to hear more about it, let me know in the comments. That's the only way I can know. So, yeah, let's go ahead and get the show started.
Welcome to the Dirty Wrench Podcast, the show that goes in, out, and all around the heavy equipment world. And now, here is your host, Jim with a G.
Welcome back. As usual, guys, thanks for having you. Thanks for coming back. Thanks for coming by. And for all my new listeners, thank you. For the ones that come back, thank you again. Yeah, like I said, we're going to try something a little different this week. I'm going to try a more controversial topic just because why not? Maybe it'll stir up a little more stuff on the internet and stuff, people commenting and this and that, but we'll see. So this week, we're going to touch on something now. This actual topic only really, only really is going to be described the way I'm going to describe it in the heavy equipment world. Every other part of the world, when it comes to on highway trucking or automobiles, and stuff like that. That stuff doesn't, it's a little different because of how some of the power transmitting systems are designed and how they work in heavy equipment. But yeah, we're going to talk about the leading machines. A lot of people swear that's the way they need to go. A lot of people, don't have anything bad to say about it. They're, of course, they're rebellious and of course it's illegal. A lot of people know that, don't know that. Yes, but if you alter any emissions on anything you have purchased in the United States, that is illegal and, and not real frowned upon by the EPA and any other authoritative figure that enforces their rules and regulations. But yeah, you get a big trouble if you do get caught. But we're not going to talk about all that. Obviously, diesel trucks, they're known, you want power, you want speed, you delete it. You get rid of the emissions, you let it run. Everybody will tell you that's the first thing they tell you when you get one. They'll just delete it. You don't got to worry about that. Now, it has its pluses. It really does. When you talk about uh, not having to purchase emissions related sensors and components and stuff when they go bad consistently, the cost, the savings there are, it pays for itself 3 or 4 times. You talk about Obviously performance, you get a little bump depending on what kind of or how you deleted your diesel engine. But once you start talking about that, that's where the on highway trucking world stays. And now we start talking about machines. So a lot of people like to think, oh, same. I can delete my, Dodge pickup truck and it's got a Cummins in it. Oh, I can delete my machine because it has a Cummins in it too. And that's not the case. That is not the case. Yes, you can delete it. There's people that do it. We're not going to say it's impossible. There's people all around the United States that do it. But the problem is, it's the way they do it, or how they do it, or how they go about it, and that's where the stuff starts getting a little blurry, and people end up biting in more than they can chew. So basically, um, when a customer reaches, I'm not a customer because obviously I don't do that because I work for a dealership. But when a operator or a consumer who bought a car, bought a machine, um, when they get tired eventually of buying depth sensors and knock sensors and any other emissions related components, DPFs, SCRs, all that stuff. When they get tired of doing that, first thing they do is go, "Oh, I'm deleting it. Forget this." Especially when machines start getting higher hours, when the cost per components aren't as justifiable as they were when the machine was brand new. That's when usually people start to, when it becomes more appealing. You can pay, I can pay X amount for a depth sensor, or I can pay a little less or a little more and get rid of it altogether. You know, like I said, to each their own. Regardless if it's an on highway vehicle or off highway vehicle, let me rephrase it. It is illegal. You are caught, you will be fined. And in some extreme cases, get taken to jail. So this is more informative, not telling anybody to or not to. This is just a conversation. Last time I'm going to say that because I don't need to reiterate it any more than I already have. But like I said, people talk about it, and the biggest issue is that people do it and have no idea how it really affects how their machine works, how it wears, what does it do, what doesn't it do, because they think it's going to do the same thing that their pickup truck does. And it doesn't. And bottom line, it doesn't. All right. When you get a delete file for a specific pickup truck or a car, whatever has the diesel engine in it that drives on the road, they have all the parameters figured out, from your transmission to your fueling to all that stuff. All that's figured out in most cases. So you don't got to worry about it. You plug in, you do what you got to do, you drive down the road, and you just have fun, enjoy what you got to enjoy. But when it comes to machines, that's where things get different, go different, because machine transmissions and power transmitting devices don't work the same as your transmission does in your car. Um, you know, and I say that with a grain of salt because technically, fundamentally, they do work, most of them the same, but they're different in a lot of aspects. So let's get with, smaller wheel loaders, bulldozers, hydrostat transmissions, which is pretty much anything small horse to medium horsepower. And unless you're talking about certain manufacturers, they get into the higher horsepower range where they're still hydrostat. But when you get into a hydrostat drivetrain, all right, it's set to run at a certain power range. It's set to do things at certain pressures, hydraulic pressures, and certain components are meant to work within pressures and temperatures and parameters that they were set by the factory. All right. So adding more power, or adding any more engine, ability doesn't improve the machine's running ability. It doesn't make it more powerful. It doesn't make it faster. It doesn't make it stronger. It still runs the same. And the reason that is because you haven't changed the thing that makes it run. You haven't changed how it shifts. You haven't changed how it transfers power from one speed to the other. You haven't messed with any of that because no one's going to mess with it because it's not cost effective to do it. So there isn't people, putting stuff on, tuning stuff in the woods and seeing what they do. If they shift this point one way and this shift point the other way, they're not going to do that because it's too hard. And there's so many loops you got to get through to be able to get that ability, that it's not worth it. Now, this isn't on everything. This is, some of the stuff's there on the internet. And all you got to do is learn how to read and you can, get what you need to get. But as a whole, you talk about your big names, Cat, John Deere, Komatsu, Case, International Harvester, Link Belt, all these companies, that make real machines. You're not going to go out and try to make things work because each one has their own way of doing it. So, in order for you to actually be able to guarantee something's going to make more power or guarantee that what you did adds performance, you'd have to go to each manufacturer and each model, have a file for each one, each size, each little feature, and no one's gonna pay for that because it's gonna cost you an arm and a leg unless you just like giving stuff away for free. You know? And so like when you start talking about deleting diesel engines on HST powertrain systems, you're not doing anything. The reliefs are still gonna relief at the same amount of pressure. You're just gonna get there a lot faster. Almost like putting a huge turbo on a car and having street tires on it that are half the size they were. You're just gonna blow right through them. Just spinning your wheels. That's all you're doing is spending fuel. Now, as you know, there's different levels of deleting. You have just deletes that just delete sensors, and they just run off pure engine parameters. Then you obviously have your performance levels, but a lot of people try putting these performance tunes in these, machines thinking that they're going to make more power and they don't. Now if you get somebody who put a, they call it eco, which is just sensors. The machine stays running the same. You just delete all the sensors from giving you errors and doing stuff and it relying on certain things like an EGR valve or DEF injector or DEF sensor or NOx sensors, ammonia sensors, stuff like that. That would be a good use of your money if you wanted to go that route. Because you're not going to alter how the machine runs. You're just altering your price when things go bad. That's just one less thing you got to take out of the equation. But then you got, say, you get back excavators. People think deleting excavators is a good time. Now, excavators are a little easier, I'd say, to be able to adjust and make more power because they don't have a powertrain. Everything's hydraulics for the most part. So all you got to do is have a good fundamental of hydraulics and knowing what reliefs and what pressures need to do what. And yeah, you can make an excavator have more power. Now, mind you, it goes back to saying, how many people are doing that? How many people are taking all their knowledge they have from working at their specific dealer and risking their credibility in their job going out and applying these power ups to these machines and no one's doing it because it's not worth it. Once again, you can roll coal all you want in your excavator. All you're doing is spending fuel. And if you got a big job site and you got a whole bunch of machines doing it, you're just wasting money. Just send me the money. You don't got to do all that. Just send it to me. It'll be more use. It'll be more useful. And then you get into your wheel loaders and your haul trucks, obviously, which have transmissions, and your bigger bulldozers, which have transmissions that are like car transmissions. They have counter shafts, they have clutch packs, and this and that. And there you may be able to feel a little bit more of your power. Not as much as an excavator for tuning wise, but a wheel loader, haul truck, maybe, because when you get down into it, power matters. And when you don't have the power to pull up a hill with full load, yeah, you're going to feel it. But at what sacrifice? Because even though you have all that power, the transmission, the torque converter, they're all set up to run within a certain parameter. So you're back at it. Now your wheel loader bucket isn't going to move any faster, slower, isn't going to have any more power because you have a control valve that controls all that. But your transmission, being that's a direct, countershaft transmission, or, whatever torque flight, whatever the Dana transmission that they decide to put, Eaton Fuller transmission, whatever they decide to pull in there, um, they will, it will be able to transfer the power once it locks up, and you'll be able to feel that. But at the same time, how much power can you put before components start to fail prematurely? And that's the biggest thing that people look over. With all the machines we've gone out to that we can't touch anymore because they're deleted. Oh yeah, that's another thing. If you have a machine that is deleted and you call a dealership or somebody that would be looked at by the EPA or has software or anything that can connect to the internet, they cannot hook up to your machine to check anything with the engine anymore, because as soon as it does, they're at jeopardy of being fined because they dealt with a deleted emissions defiant engine. And like I said, no one's gonna lose that kind of money. But yeah, so go back to off that little tangent. So yeah, so only in that point, is everybody starting to realize, oh, maybe I didn't need all that. I don't know. We have a customer. He deleted, a bigger bulldozer. He thought it was the coolest thing since sliced bread. I had to give him the bad news and tell him, hey, look, man, it's the last time we're going to be able to come out here unless you return it back to factory. And he's like, well, that's BS. I go, well, I can't I can't do nothing for you, buddy. I didn't tell you to break the law. You did it on your own. Well, anyway, so he had this machine for a few years, running great. Always complaining about it, going to a pile, just start rolling black smoke. He thought it was the coolest thing in the world. Well, then he started going through fuel pumps, and it started, one every 6 to 7 months, and then it started going a little faster, to the point where he's like, hey, you guys need to fix this. And we're like, we cannot fix it because you decided to run the engine outside of its parameters that is designed to run in. He's like, well, that's bull crap because, I'm a customer, this and that. I've done this, I've done that. Look, I can't help you, man. You are asking more of the fuel system. The fuel system wasn't designed to run like this for this amount of time. Of course, it's going to fail. And of course, he wasn't happy because things didn't work out for him. All the money that he saved up front ended up costing him money in the end. We've had customers that have done it to wheel loaders and haul trucks, and they end up blowing through clutch packs in their transmissions. Why? Because they step on it in the wrong gear and it doesn't downshift like it's supposed to, so it tries to drive through, and eventually it heats up the clutch pack and it wears it out prematurely. Pinions, brakes, all that stuff wears prematurely when you start to add power, speed, more, how do you say, more use, heavier use than what it was intended for. And like I said, it's about what it weighs out and what it doesn't weigh out to be. But, like I said, that's the biggest thing about deleting anything is what it does in the long run. Unless you, like I said, you do like a little eco thing, you don't do anything crazy, you're not looking to try to, push the next town over, or spin the world backwards when you take off. Like I said, you're smart with it. It probably won't give you no issues. You'll go 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,000, 8,000 with the just normal wear and tear. Instead of putting multiple sensors on things and doing stuff like that, paying all that money, it's it's over with right there. But it's all about the person that's trying to do it, the personality of the people. Who's deleting? What are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to gain? It's a lot more common than people think it is. And the funniest part, it's a lot more. The people that do it wouldn't be the people you actually think would do it. And you'd be surprised where people try to save $1. It's funny we keep bringing that up. Save $1. do stuff like that, be more cost effective. It all always connects somehow, some way or another. But yeah, it's something that, I thought it'd be good to talk about. Deleting things, especially with everything trying to go electric at the same point in time. It's is it worth it? Is it not worth it? What is it worth to you? What how much in the long run is it worth to you versus the short run, the short game? Are you a single owner operator? Do you only have one machine and you're just tired of paying for somebody, to put a depth sensors in your machine every 6 to 8 months? That's up to you. Look at the farmers in the United States. They're all going against a class action lawsuit against John Deere, and all these other farm tractor companies, Case and all this, because they can't work on their machines. They become so technologically advanced that they don't want to, you can't work on them. The regular Joe Schmo can't touch them, can't do anything with them. And instead of farming and growing crops and planting crops, their machines are down and nobody can get to them because parts are on back order. So, of course, they're angry. And granted, the less they're doing, the less there is for people to purchase at the grocery stores. The less meat there is, the less corn, fruits, vegetables, you know, material for clothes and stuff like that. It all gets affected. But, that's one of the reasons why there is a class action lawsuit against them, and they're in deep water because all the farmers aren't buying new machines anymore unless they're like higher end farmers and they can afford to have 3 or 4 machines, which that class of farmer is shrinking every day. But, it's crazy because, the thing that's supposed to save the world is costing the world some money. And you look at the military, everything they own is deleted. They buy it deleted. Brand new F-250s deleted. Brand new tractors deleted. Tanks deleted. No emissions whatsoever. Why? Because they can't afford for it to go down in combat. Shocker. Which, granted, somebody's firing a gun at me. Last thing I want is a def code coming across the dash and derating my engine. But, the stipulation stands. Where does it stop? Where does it go? But, you look at farming, maybe they should lift the emission standard for farmers, help them out, make it cheaper for them to own and operate their machinery. That'll bump the farming economy up. They don't have to spend as much money. They can buy more new things. Maybe new things become cheaper because they don't have to spend money on those sensors and all that stuff on there. So the tractor itself becomes cheaper. Therefore, people buy more. You can think about it any way, shape, or form. It can go beneficial and unbeneficial in any way. But that's just the biggest thing that hits everybody. You don't have to be heavy equipment guy. You don't have to be on highway trucking to know that, you know, farmers do a lot in this country. They give a lot, a lot of produce, a lot of products, and without them, there's no food in the stores. There's no meat. There's no cattle. There's no clothes. There's, like I said, it's, they're down. They're down. We're down. And, they can try to, justify it all they want, but truth's the truth. But yeah, that, like I said, that's something that hits really hard there. And, like I said, this stuff's illegal. But why is it illegal? Who's making the money? Is this just another, like to say it, greedy science? Greedy tactic to make somebody more money than normal? You know, who's benefiting from this? Obviously the EPA, they find people, they get stuff. Who else? Companies are forcing people to buy proprietary products to keep their machines running. When you invent something, no one says you got to have that's got to last forever. No one says that, it's got to last X amount of time. If you make something specific for your machine to run, you engineered it, it can last 3 months at a time. And guess what? People that are financing them, people that are would have to pay them, regardless of what, because they're not going to pay for a machine that stopped running. They're not going to do all that, and that's the truth. So who's really hurting with the EPA stuff besides the end user? Obviously, the environment. You can go on any tangent you want with that. They did say that due to all the emission stuff they put in, the ozone has started to rebuild itself. Don't know how true that is or isn't. So take that with a grain of salt. But, you know, they claim all this stuff, and then you got all these companies profiting on stuff that you have to buy. You have to buy it. You have to buy depth sensors. You have to buy NOx sensors. And there's very little to no aftermarket products for this stuff because it's all proprietary from the get go. Companies are manufacturing things and they're keeping them to themselves so no one else can do anything with it. They're putting special things in them so no one can copy them or do stuff, or they're making it impossible for them to copy by only making certain things available. And yeah, it makes money. Can't dock them for it. If it was you, you'd be trying to make money too. But it's it's the way it works, the way business works, the way things got to go. And yeah, I don't know why my volume's going less and less far away. Oh man. But yeah, I hope you guys like that topic. I hope it was good. I hope it sparks a little controversy in the comment section. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Maybe it'll add to it. Maybe people just will keep doing the same thing and ignoring me. Now, I would like to know about emissions in other places. Obviously, third world countries, they don't have emissions because no one cares. Not saying we don't care, but they don't care to make emissions, so there's nobody enforcing them. That's what I mean by that. Obviously, the environment's everywhere, not just in one spot. But you got Europe, you got Canada, you got all the. Canada just made it illegal to drive anything before 2005. So I guess if you need a new truck or a newer truck, there's going to be a smoking deals on them here pretty soon. But why do they do that? Pushes people to buy more cars. Push people to buy newer cars. Stop making your old hunk of junk stay running. That's not fair, but they did it. It's their country. Let them do what they want to. But like Europe's emissions, how do they work there? Is there people deleting stuff there? Africa, South America, the bigger places. Is there people deleting Asia? The Middle East. Are there people deleting stuff there? Is it even a thing? I don't know. But if you're there and you're listening, comment down. And if you know a little bit, um, that'd be cool to share and make more people know. But yeah, that's really it. Without going into too far tangents, like I said, just to recap, deleting whatever you want is illegal. No way around it. Can't say nothing. Can't do nothing about it. It's illegal. But if you do it and you do want to play the game, obviously do your research. Make sure what you're doing is what you actually need, not more. Make sure that you have a way of working on these things if you're incapable of. Make sure you have somebody in line that will work on them once you alter something. Because once you alter stuff, 9 times out of 10, dealerships just gonna wipe their hands with you. And they do that because the liability gets thrown back on them, and they're not gonna take the liability and afford for them to have to pay money for something that you did. Um, you know, going get that mechanic, have a guy on standby, or learn yourself. Learn what you're doing, learn what it does, learn how to fix it when it breaks. Have a way to get parts. A lot of this stuff, there's no if ways around it. It's gonna break whether you like it or not. When it does it, I don't know. Does everyone's break the same way? No. Some people's breaks, every so often. Some people don't. You're replacing sensors every other month. You're replacing sensors once a year, once every 6 years. It all depends where you at, who you are, and how much stuff you run through. But I will say this: neglect and poor practices cause a lot of DEF related mission problems. Starting with DEF itself. It's 33.3% ammonia. The rest is water. You don't want to alter that ratio. It's got to be there, or 32.5. It's 30 to 32.5, something like that. It's got to be right there. You got a little tolerance, and then it's out. Then you got a problem. It doesn't like it, kicks it out. Boom, derates your machine. If you leave it out too long, the water evaporates out. Now your ratio goes up. Guess what? Boom, back to derate. If it's dirty, boom, back to derate. You got to be careful of all that stuff. How are you running your machine? Are you running it properly? Are you not paying attention when you're in a burn pile and you set the harness on fire and now the sensor doesn't work? Now you're derated next to the fire. Not ideal. Stuff like that. Being a dealer, everything we do is always warranty. Most of our jobs are warranty. Any dealership's that way. Nobody's going to pay extra unless they have it. I don't blame them. But a lot of calls we go out to, is mostly neglect. And like I said before, a real dealership that worries about customer service will always do the best they can for their customers. And if that means making things happen that didn't happen or making stuff work, that's what you do. Now, granted, there's a real fine line to that. So don't think every single thing is, oh yeah, we'll make it covered. No. You didn't put oil in your stuff and you blow your final drive, guess what? That's on you. Now, you say, oh, I kept checking it, this and that, and it was low, and then, oh, well, look, it's low today. I need somebody to come out to it. Okay, guess what? New floating seal for you. It failed. Warranty will get you going. You didn't do no damage. You did good. Take credit where it's due. Give credit where it's not, but not so much. And that's the fair thing to do. That's the customer service thing to do. But a lot of these stuff can be, avoided. Regen issues, high idling. A lot of people don't understand that idling kills DPFs, clogs them right up. A lot of companies have put auto idle stuff in their stuff, in their programming. So when you're sitting there, it automatically tries to regen to help with all that stuff. But some people, like my manufacturer, they they have to have certain parameters in place for it to do it while it's idling. Now if you're running, it'll do it on its own and help clean itself out and do that. Do that stuff there. Not shutting the engine off too fast, not letting it idle. Let it idle for 5 minutes after a long day. You don't need to just shut it off. Just maintenance, changing filters, making sure things are where they need to be. Just little things here and there won't kill you, and it'll prevent a lot of DEF problems. I know. I'd say about 70% of our calls are emissions related, and about 40% of those calls could have been prevented. And that's a pretty high number if you're thinking like these customers that have 20, 30, 40 machines on a job site. Because last thing somebody who has that many machines wants is one not running, making him money. You buy a machine. You're a single person. You just bought yourself a brand new little dozer. You're going to try to start your, earth moving business or your house pad business or some kind of construction or land management business. And, and you overlook stuff. And then you're down. Then you're not making any money at all because all the money you just made has to go to have somebody come fix it. Now, if you bought new, no harm, no foul, as long as it's warranty, as long as you didn't do it, it'll get fixed, no problem. But if you bought a used, second, third hand, trying to save $1, guess what? That's all on you. Now you either learn how to fix it or you're paying full price for a technician to come fix it. Not ideal. But maintenance, we had the conversation about maintenance. Maintenance prevents most emissions related issues that you run into that cause all these people to give it a bad name. And like I said, we got customers that never have one issue. Strangest thing. Couldn't tell you why. Couldn't tell you what they do different than anybody else, but they just doesn't give them issue. But yeah, that's all I got this week. Hope you guys like that topic. Hope it sparks a little controversy. Hope you guys give some feedback. Remember, comment underneath. The podcast here on Spotify, you can comment. I don't think I'm gonna do a poll this week. Maybe the next episode I will. Just because, I don't really have anything to poll about. But yeah, if you didn't watch the last vlog, go ahead and do it. It's on YouTube. It's supposed to be on the Facebook page too. If you ain't seen it, The Dirty Wrench Podcast on Facebook. Join the page. Give you some updates there. Going to do a lot of updates here coming up, along with on Instagram. And depending on how the short content comes, probably get on TikTok, start posting content there. But yeah, that's it. Appreciate you guys for stopping by. Appreciate you guys for coming in. And yeah, hope you guys come back next week. We appreciate you. Thank you very much.